Welcome to Homicide Life on the Set, a podcast about the Emmy Award-winning television show Homicide Life on the Street, with myself, Chris Carr, and Susan Ingram. On today's show, we're joined by the assistant directors, Frank Ferro, Tobias, and Miles Perman. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. Susan, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you, Chris?
Yeah, good, thank you. Today's episode, we've got the ADs and the assistant directors are kind of the people who kind of the glue of holding everything together, and sort of they're almost like, I liken them to the adults in the room whilst everybody else is a bit like the kids. They're the ones who have to make sure that, you know, you got to get everything you need, you stay on schedule, and when things do go over schedule, they're the ones who have to work with the director to figure out maybe how can we do things differently. So really looking forward to this conversation. But any thoughts you have before we kind of go into it?
Yeah, I think one of the things is what you just said. I mean, I was on the set because I was a camera assistant. So, you know, I wasn't dealing with pre-production. I wasn't dealing with post-production. Also wasn't dealing with all the problems they had to deal with in running this, 100+ crew of people, that range from the extras, through the actors, through all the different departments, and making sure everybody, like you said, everybody has what they need. So I thought this was really cool because this, I think, besides with Tom and the writers and with David Simon, is one of the first sort of technical looks at behind the scenes of pre-production, through production, through post-production, and the kinds of things they were responsible for. And so Tobias, Frank Ferro, and Miles Perman are joining us, and I guess we can talk afterward. They really have quite the resumes of things they worked on after Homicide. But also, one thing I really enjoyed with this was their origin stories, how they got into the business, and then what brought them to Homicide, which is always fun to hear from our guests.
Yeah, indeed. Well, let's get into the episode, and we'll join you on the other side. Frank, Jay, Miles, welcome to our podcast. It's great to have you on. And how are you all doing?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Thank you.
It's very good to be here. Thank you. It's exciting that the show's on streaming on Peacock now, and it's wonderful to watch it.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good question to start off on, really. Have you all managed to watch any of it on Peacock, and what are your impressions of it?
Well, I actually just started watching a couple of days ago, and it was quite amazing to see it. It looks much better. It's 16:9, and I'm sure it gets better as the seasons progress. But first thing I noticed, it just looks better than I think that they had intended. They did a great job digitizing it and whatever magic they did. But it's nice to see. Eventually, we'll go through it all, and all these memories will come flooding back, and there are many, many memories.
Mm-hmm.
Good ones, mostly.
I also just started watching it. My wife had never. I don't think she'd seen any, because I don't have the box set, and really, the idea was for her to at least watch the 3 that I directed. I said, I directed 3, and the feeling I always had was I don't like watching things that I work on, because and so it was great. We watched the 3 episodes. I think we watched the pilot first because I wanted to make sure she knew the characters, all of the characters, the original thing, and what Barry's concept was. And then we watched my 3 episodes, and then we started to watch episodes that I wanted to see. And to go away from your question for one, I wanted to see one that I really loved the directors, and it was Larry and Leslie, who, I really liked a lot of the directors, but Larry and Leslie I had a great time with, so I wanted to go to the motel episode, Full Moon. And we watched it, and then it had Frank's name as the first AD. And it's like, I remembered all the talk we had about Reverend, the Reverend Horton Heat. And I remember scouting this location and joking with I want to say Frank again, with our production designer. I just blanked on it.
Vince Bryanio.
Yeah. And saying, I can't believe you're taking us all the way the hell out here. With Jim is going to frickin' have my head because we're so far away. We can't do this. And then I had Frank's name on it. And it was like, I have photographs of me with Larry and Leslie on that set with Reverend Horton Heat, with the tinfoil and the crazy crosses and the red light, and how Larry and Leslie were so adamant about the colors. But I didn't remember necessarily the naked lady. And so I said, maybe this is the episode where Jimmy said, you're going to be production managing this pilot, Falls Road. And he took me away. But Frank, do you remember ADing that episode?
No,
so
not
you're
at
stealing
all.
my credits like the other Pharaoh guy is stealing yours.
Yeah, at least it didn't say Joseph Pharaoh, right?
No, it means I'm not getting. Frank is taking away my residuals, right? I'm thinking.
It's funny you say that, Jay, because as I go back and I looked and I tried to recap the directors and the episodes that I had worked on,
right,
I had the same issue. I saw Ivan's name was on an episode once, and I think they may have rearranged the order at some point, but there were several instances where I had the same issue. So I'm not quite sure what happened.
Okay, NBC, if you're listening, you need to fix that.
We go for it. We'll get a lot of checks.
I have all the call sheets, Frank. They're in the basement. I'll check.
All right.
I'll check the call
great.
Yep.
So I'm not quite sure what
Yeah,
happened.
that's weird. So let's wind back. Yeah. So Miles, have you had a chance to look at the restoration? It's funny that we call it a restoration, but yeah, the streaming version.
I did watch the first episode, and what came to light was just I was very young working on the show, and as were all of us, and I just didn't really get the dialogue as much as I got the dialogue. The dialogue in the first episode, just between. It was like Crissetti was with Clark, and just their dynamic together, the dialogue together. It was brilliant, and I just don't think I understood how brilliant of a show it was that we were working on back then, being so young and naive in the business.
All right, it's funny things strike me. I was watching, I think it was Stakeout last night. I'm up to season 4, middle of season 4. I'm trying to watch them all over again. I'd watched all the DVDs and I'm watching the streaming. And there was a line where I think Megan Russert, Isabella says to Richard Belzer, women don't often, torture and murder women. And Richard Belzer says, unless there's a gingerbread man involved. Really funny, clever dialogue. Yeah, really good. Good stuff. So let's start with start over, and we'll go backwards this time. From hey, how did you guys get into the business, and how did you end up on Homicide? And because there's so many of us, let's try to keep it short if we can. So go ahead, Miles. How did you get in?
Oh, start with me. I had a relative that is in the business. Barry Levinson's a cousin of mine.
I think I forgot that.
And he got me on, and I was one of the new green PAs on the show. there were a few of us that had relatives that were on the show that started at the same time, and I'm the one that made it all the way through. So,
nice. But you had been working in the business before that, right?
I had not, as a production assistant. I worked on Avalon as an actor for one scene. That's where I met Frank Ferro. And I hung out on the set a lot for that. And then I did stand-in work on Her Alibi, which was a Tom Selleck, Paulina Portsakova movie.
I remember that film, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a great film, but I was a stand-in on that back in the day. And, I was just always mesmerized by the AD team. I thought that was the path I wanted to choose. And when I met Frank, I said, I want to do what he's doing. And that was sort of my start into the business, was I wanted to be like Frank.
Oh, cool. Want to be like Frank. That's great. So Jay, how did you were a DGA trainee, correct?
Yeah, I wanted to be like Frank. So my mother had just always wanted me to be, an actor, writer, director. Like, her thing was Jerry Lewis and stuff. And I got, so that was, please don't. And so I graduated high school early. I was like 16, and I went right to college. And at college, and this is the only reason that Jerry Lewis gets in here, the first event at the college for people in the film and the film and television division was Jerry Lewis doing a guest talk, and he was making a show. And at the end of it, he says, if anybody wants to be in the show, I need extras. So I went on it there. Then I was a PA on a bunch of shows. And then from PA, the second AD said he just wanted me to be his second forever, his team forever, which I did not love that idea. But I heard about the training program. I was at University of Miami. I went up to New York, flew up to New York for the, they took me in. First, you had to fill out a form. They take you up there. There's a guy who's the head of the program. There were like 600 people in the auditorium at the Directors Guild Theater. And he gives a speech about becoming a trainee. And one of the things he said was that the lifespan of an average AD is 54 years old. I'm sure I told you guys this story because I always use it. And so I was still a teenager, and it was like 54 is forever. Who wants to live that long? And so I went for it, and ultimately they took 6 people into the training program that year. And I stayed. I went through the 2 years of training program, and then second, and a few years later as a first. The way I got on this show was, I think, Nina, had you been working on the show? You did the first season, Frank?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So was Nina one of the first?
Yes, she was.
So I guess, Jimmy must have asked Nina for someone she could recommend. I had been doing Young Indiana Jones Chronicles in Wilmington, all the domestic stuff. And she had moved to Wilmington also in North Carolina. And, she saw me. I was doing Young Indy. I'm sure she gave Jimmy my name. And then I came on the second season. There were 3 episodes that one of the ADs did, and I did not do the episode that was Robin Williams. So, and then Jimmy kept calling me back the season, I was there. So that's how I got on the show.
So Frank, how'd you get in the film business, and what was the connection?
Well,
with Homicide?
When I graduated from Towson State University back in the day, I remained in Baltimore and just worked on commercials and movies. And I was fortunate enough to work on Barry Levinson's Avalon as a production assistant under the tutelage of Peter Giuliano, first AD, big time, tough first AD. An incredible experience with him. And I was also a production assistant on John Waters' Crybaby. And I had done several other movies as a production assistant, but then I did David Mamet's film called Homicide, actually no relation. And Matthew Carlisle was the first AD. Karen Collins was the key second, but there was no second AD. And Michael Hausman was our producer, a very prolific producer. And at the end, Michael Hausman said, "Hey, I think we're gonna bump up Frank at the end of the show. We're gonna put him in the Directors Guild." And this was about 1990, I guess, in the fall of 1990. So they had put me into the DGA. I wasn't on the Southern California qualifications list. However, it's still, I think, called the third area. So I could only work outside of New York and Los Angeles, which was fine since I lived in Baltimore, and it seemed to be working out. So, after that, I think the only thing I did, I had the wonderful opportunity to be an additional second AD on Forrest Gump. That was quite amazing. And then Homicide came along in '92. And Jimmy Finnerty, I met with Jim, who I can't say enough things about, probably one of the most influential people I've ever met in my entire career. And he said, "All right, you're going to be my second AD." I'm like, "But Jimmy, I don't have any experience being a key second AD. I can't be your second AD. I would feel very comfortable being your second. I've never done this." Like, he's like, "You're all I got, kid. You're the only one in the union." This was before Shelley Ziegler got in the union.
Wow.
Shelley Ziegler's now, big time first AD, and who also did Homicide. So I was the key second, much to the chagrin of Nina Noble, who was one of the first ADs on the first season, and Rob Roy was also the first AD. And Rob Roy really helped me so much, and so did Jim Finnerty. He said, we're gonna get you through this. We're gonna help you," and they did. And we just didn't know what we were doing back then. I didn't know what I was doing. I honestly did not know. I mean, most of our crew, the NBC gave Jim and Barry a number. "You can do the show if you can do it for this number," and that number required as many local people as possible, without bringing people from Los Angeles, without bringing people from New York, housing them, per diem, all that. So it was primarily a fully local crew, and we all learned. And Jimmy stuck with me and helped me out and Rob Roy. I can't thank Rob Roy enough. And then it just went from there, and I was the key second for the first 3.5 seasons. And then during season 4, I was made a first AD.
Quick question for the benefit of the audience. So not everybody listening are going to have film experience. So I was wondering if maybe you could start, Frank, and then I'll let others fill in. Could you explain what the assistant directors do and the different types of assistant directors on Homicide?
Well, we could start with the first AD. Basically does all the scheduling, all the prep work, make sure that every scene is properly prepared with all the different departments. We do all the scouting. We have all the meetings with all the different departments. And then you do all the prep work, you get on the set, and then the first AD manages the set and runs the set and make things go smoothly and assist the director, make sure the director that gets what he or she wants. The key second AD is in charge of the call sheet. The call sheet is basically what the work is for the day, for each day. It's a list of when the actors are coming in, all the props, all the set dressing. It has an advanced schedule for the next several days of what the will be shooting. The second director is usually always on the set, helping the first AD. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because I think back in my earlier days as a key second, I was on set more often than second ADs these days tend to be. I don't know. Jay, would you agree with that?
I didn't have second when I started as a second. There was just the second AD who I had to do paperwork on a bulletin board, and I always had messy handwriting anyway, so it was just work. While I was on set, and I had to always be in the eye line of the first AD. So, and then if I was going to leave the set for any reason, if I had to physically go and get the the actors to set, or if I had to go to all the different departments and make sure that they can make times, then somebody had to stand and be there for me watching. But no, nothing like how it is now. Totally different world. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe Miles, because Miles, you were a second, and a second. Talk about what your duties were.
Yeah, my roles as a second. I directed the background. So if we were in the squad room, I would set the squad room up with background extras, and we were at a crime scene, I would set up they'd say, our next scene is the crime, we would know what our next scene is. Go start setting up the crime scene. So I would work with the Teamsters, I would work with props, I would work with set dressing, I would get the cars in place, I would get the yellow tape up or save some yellow tape so that someone could be putting the yellow tape up in the scene. I sort of placed the background to where I thought that they would need to be. We shot handheld, which is not typical of other shows that we worked on in the future, any of us, or even before we started on Homicide. So the camera was basically 360. So you had to be ready to go in any direction at any time, unless we knew where the video village was going to be set up prior to us getting out there. So my job was to prepare for the next scene or direct the background in the scene that we were shooting. Even as a production assistant, you play a role in cueing background through different shots. You look at your sides, which are the mini scripts, to make sure that you're trying to match the same cross at each given time, which was nearly impossible with Homicide because we never cut. So we would just reset. And before you had time to reset the background, you were already cueing someone coming to the left that's coming from the right in the previous cut. So
right, because you're yelling reset while Jean or Alex was still rolling, right?
Exactly.
And he would just whip back around to whatever the starting camera position was.
Yeah. So if you watch just the background in the first few seasons, or you'll see the same extra behind, say, Richard Belzer in one scene, as he's talking, you'll cut over. If he's talking to Yaphet Kotto, you'll look behind Yaphet. That same extra is like over Yaphet's shoulder, No one really watches the background that closely.
Don't let them know that.
But a lot of twins in Baltimore.
That's right.
Yeah, that's how it rolled. And then, as a key second, you spend a lot of time in the trailer. You're planning the next day, so you're not on set as much. I spent my time as a key second playing poker with the Teamsters at times. So, we all had
that sounds dangerous. I hope you weren't playing for money with those guys.
Oh, we were.
Would you be able to talk us through your prep, production, post-production, and scheduling? So talk us through like an episode of Homicide, how they kind of start from you getting the script into it ending up on television from your side of things.
And also that you guys were doing the first ADs rotated where every other episode, because you were prepping an episode while the other first was shooting an episode.
So when I was watching this video, do you remember Zan doing that video? Mostly Zan, but everybody I'd given my video camera to when I was directing, and I said, just shoot it because I'm leaving the show and I want to remember this show. I want to have something. So, Chris, I don't know if you got to watch any of it.
I've seen the bit of it. It's really good, really interesting.
The reason I sent it to Susan for you was because everybody, the podcasts I've listened to, everybody's got a different version of some things that are the same. And even Joe, who's the key grip, and I'm going to be screwing up.
Josh
Spring.
Josh.
Well, Josh was the gaffer and Joe was the key.
But they had different memories of the way it was, and I have
video evidence.
All this will have. And so I had that video, and that's why I sent it to you. You'll see bits, you'll see the butt dolly, you'll see. And I meant to ask, and I'll get back to the real question in a sec. Was the Pope Mobile on Homicide? Was that? Because I had a show where we had something called the Pope Mobile.
Yes. Well, whether you had one on another show or not, but the semi-Pope Mobile was they cut the Cavalier in half and then put the plexi in front of it for the Hat episode with Lily Tomlin.
But that was the nickname we had, right? Was Popemobile?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. So Joe and Josh talk about that, and it was in a few other episodes as well where they talked about it. And then after we created that for that episode, which we'll get to, we started using it more often, and Alex would request it. So the way it goes is I get a script. Usually, I think as years went on, I could trust my second or my second to watch set. I would leave on as soon as I got a script. So on day 7 we had a 7-day show. Most shows, especially, are 8 or even 9. When you're in New York or Hollywood and most other places, and because you needed that. I mean, you couldn't shoot a regular show without having more hours and more days cumulatively. Homicide, Jim said you got 7 days, you got 12 hours, as everybody tells you. And usually 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., especially because Thursdays, we didn't want it to go past 7:30 because Seinfeld was going to be on. And
the pool closes at 8.
I had to get...
Now, see, here's the difference in memory. I remember starting on Wednesdays or Thursdays with the night work. So Wednesday or Thursday would be a noon or a 1 o'clock call, and then it would go later as the week.
My episodes, I tried to
maybe
just
you got
have
out
the
of there in
night
time to
work
watch Seinfeld.
Like it.
Well, the Teamsters.
It's critical.
Sorry if this is a funny thing. The Teamsters would call me Nighttime Frank. Oh, here Frank's on, so we're going to be working nights on Fridays. And I said, guys, you do understand why we have to have a late call, because we have a night exterior. Oh, that's the reason why. And still to this day, they call me Midnight Frank.
Wow.
It was the only way we could get the turnaround.
That's right.
For Monday morning,
Cut your
which we could do with the
weekend in
crew,
half.
but not with the actors. Yeah. So that's how it would go. I got the script. If I could get out on day 7 of a shoot, or at least half of it, to start prepping, then, because Jim wanted it as quickly as possible, then I could get a schedule out, talk it through with Jimmy. If there were issues that I said, we can't do this in 7 days, especially not in 12 hours because of this scene, this scene, this scene. Jimmy would call the writers up, say, okay, this is a day scene, not a night scene. Cut this by 2 pages. Put this scene over here. And Jimmy would tell the writers that doesn't happen anywhere else. This is because Jim was given ultimate power by Tom. And, Tom was off in New York. The rest of the writers team was here. And there were changes over the years as to who the co-executive producers were, because there was Henry, and there was Overmeyer, Eric Overmeyer. There was, and over the years, the various writers would move up into higher powers. So Julie was not originally a co-EP. Julie came in as regular writer staff, right? But she had been someone who worked with and for Tom before Homicide started. So I would go, Jim would call them, say, no. Then once regular prep time started, probably 2 or day 3 when the directors would come in. So we'd have a meeting with the day 3. And then we'd go to the writer's office, which was like a block and a half away from the production office and where the stages were. And we'd have a meeting where the writers would talk. Oh, we didn't talk to them that early. Really, it was more like day 6. I think
that was the tone meeting,
right?
Right.
The tone meeting.
The tone meeting would be a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had an initial meeting. The writers said whatever, a couple of things to give a general idea. The tone meeting would be the last meeting with the writers and the director to tell them what they wanted in these scenes. Usually pretty fast on this show. I've been on shows where it's hours. And
by tone meeting, see, I don't know this term. The tone meeting was so that you guys understood how to handle the set and the director, so that the overall theme or tone of that episode came through. Is that what a tone meeting? I mean, I don't even know what that means.
got our directive mostly from Jimmy. We had to get the days done. So whatever and mind you, I've directed almost 20 shows by, about 20, and some aren't on IMDb because they never saw the light of day, pilots. But so tone meetings would change from show to show. On a Homicide, it was pretty fast. It was, okay, what would you like to know? Or it was, okay, this scene means the most here, this means the most here. I want to make sure you get these beats. And they would want to make sure. But in the early days of prep it was mostly the first ADs telling the directors, here's what you got to do. This is what the set's like. This is the way you shoot, because first of all, most of them were newbies at television. They had done independent films. This is what Barry wanted, I think, and also at Mazio, and also Gail Mutrix. And Gail Mutrix, I think, had the last word on who the directors were, or the first word. So she really had her fingers on the pulse of the indie filmmaking world. So as far as what happens here, Frank, interrupt me when you can. So then we'd go around, we'd scout with Vince and who's the location manager? Blonde
Debbie Dorsey,
Adam
Donaldson.
Debbie Dorsey first, and then after Debbie, it was Adam was on the locations, not doing the scouts.
Charlie Armstrong.
Oh, Charlie.
No,
yeah.
blonde girl.
Charlie.
She became the head of locations for Maryland, for Baltimore. Come on, she was with us for years.
Kathy Ash.
Kathy Ash.
Kathy Ash. Right.
Right.
Kathy and Debbie.
Right. So Debbie, Kathy, Adam. So we'd scout. Vince would show us things. Frank, I'm sure you did this too. At some point we would say, no way, impossible, can't do this. I remember one place, it was a row house, right? The tiny houses in really nasty neighborhoods, that we walked into one, and the stench, it was like a hoarder house, but also like papers all over the place. We didn't know from hoarders. I didn't from then. It's not like there were TV series on cable. And the animal smell of all the crap that were not being cleared up for years. It was really nasty. And I remember saying to Vince, the crew will not come in here. We cannot shoot here. Find another place. There are tons of row houses all over. And there was something about the character of that row house that Vince said, it's got to be this. And my crew will clean it up. You will not know from this crap. Which I'm thinking, well, why are we doing it? Just go to a clean row house. But we walked in. The smell was still there, not as bad as it was on the Scout. The crew was like, what the fuck? I remember Joe saying, we can't shoot here. Crew saying, this is absurd. I think we got the art department to like Lysol things over so it wasn't as bad in there, but it smelled like Lysol. Miles, do you remember this place?
I do. Now that you're talking about it, I remember that. I remember other locations that we were in. I remember Richard Belzer once took a drawer, like he got upset about something, and his character just takes a drawer and he rips it open, takes this dresser drawer out and throws it, and then hundreds of roaches just go scurrying all over the floor. The art department, I think it was this location, Jay, is when the art department went to move a picture that was hanging on the wall, and there were just hundreds of cockroaches behind the hanging picture that was all over the wall. We were in some really nasty places.
Well, you
remember that, Frank?
You two were not involved in The Wire, and Vince Sperano was the production designer on The Wire, and I worked with Vince on The Wire, and there were many times that we were in houses just like that. So so Vince, we were just used to that. It was
Vince's thing.
Yeah.
It was
I
awful.
remember-
Having said that, Vince was my favorite production designer ever.
Oh, amazing.
Any
We're
show
going to get
I
him
was
on
ever on.
because that was so much of what the show was, what made the show great
Right.
was that look. Was that really, that really.
He was John Waters'
detailed
guy.
look.
I mean, he had been with John Waters, I think, from the beginning, and he kept that John Waters feel. The Enchanted Forest, that was in the Hat, right? That was also one of my favorite locations. I loved that place. I wished it had been closed. It was out of business when we went there. Yeah.
It was so cool to go there because I used to go there when I was a kid, and you guys probably did too if you grew up around here. And to be able to see it before it was completely, it was already falling apart. But a bunch of those attractions were rescued and are out at a farm called Ellie Oak Farm out in Clarksville. So they did save some of it. But yeah, that Enchanted Forest episode was terrific.
Well, you remember Clark Johnson did the behind the scenes there. He did was it the Christmas video or one of his videos he did? So there's video of all of us like between takes going down the slides or playing around at Enchanted Forest as a crew just behind the scenes. I just remember that. Where does that live, Frank?
I don't
you guys
know.
Or Susan?
I probably have it on video.
Yeah, Clark Johnson was always great with his home movies, and he did several of them. And thankfully, they still live, and it's wonderful to watch those things.
Yeah, and was it around Christmas that we saw them, or was it the end of the season we saw them? I can't remember. Was it Christmas?
Usually at the end of the season?
I think the Christmas one he gave us all as gifts for Christmas.
Yes.
That was his
with his brother
okay.
Ron dressed up as the Black Santa.
Ron dressed up as Santa and fell through the ceiling because that happened in one of the episodes.
Like
remember?
that episode. Right.
Yeah.
I didn't finish the prep work.
Yeah,
Okay.
so where are we? We've just gone past the tone meeting and locations, yeah.
The locations.
Any other show I've done in my life, you have to have a production meeting with the crew. You have with the department heads. You come in, there's all the executives there, usually more executives than there are crew, but we had the department heads or their seconds, and we would talk through the shoot. This is usually a day or two before shooting, and say all the things that were needed. The director and I would just take them through. Homicide, Jim said, it's bullshit. Just, if there's anything anybody needs, just, deal with it. So we would go to the department heads, talk them through it, on set. They're on set. They're doing whatever hair and makeup or in their trailer and saying, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. We need this and that. And that was it. It was like, it's not like they're going to get special equipment. Jim's not going to give them, that much money. If there's specific makeup things, we would talk it through. I saw a great, in one that I directed when we were in the morgue, the makeup there was just a body. He was an extra, but the makeup people had a party with these things. If there was a say he was like, his face was ripped to the side and his chest was there. And you'll see that in the video. If you look, I'm pretty sure it's in there. But that's kind of what we did in prep. Frank, why don't you take over things I missed and
No, I think what you mentioned, the lack of a production meeting is so important because now, like, you don't think twice about having a production meeting, and that put a lot more pressure on us because our job is to come to set, and each morning everyone has to be properly prepared, and there cannot be any questions because we, as Jay mentioned, we had 12 hours. And Finnerty was tapping his watch at 6:45, and we had to be done by 7:30.
What was his phrase at that time?
Have a conscience.
Have a conscience.
Have a conscience. So that put a lot more pressure on us, and so our meetings were very critical with the department heads, and it was a very truncated prep time. We had basically 5 days with the director. And that included scouting and all the meetings and the tech scout as well. We'd show the keys if night exteriors or certain locations that maybe needed some kind of special attention.
Yeah, and the tech scouts, did you pull Josh and Joe off the set, or were they done right after? I know nobody was going to be working after work.
When the DP would let us.
So you pulled them off during the day for tech scouts sometimes, or lunchtime maybe?
We tried.
For night shoots, yeah, Miles.
Yeah, I remember the keys leaving after wraps sometimes, especially for night shoots, because no one wanted to continue working after we were wrapped, and they get pulled away. I just remember that, because I was always there for the wrap of the trucks. I was the last one out as a second. So I remember that, and I remember lunchtime scouts as well. But today you scout every location. Back then on Homicide, not every location was scouted. Only if it needed special attention. It was scouted other than the keys. So the Teamsters knew where to put the trucks and such like that, but the keys didn't go and come up with a lighting scheme or something that's done now today. It was kind of just done on the fly, as I remember. And just as a memory as me as a kid being in the business, and just remembering Jay and Frank, and this is before we had computers, right? So we had Movie Magic, which came out during our show, but before Movie Magic, I remember him with his big book of strips, and each one had different colors and cutting out. And I remember, I think my job as a PA for Jay was cut up the schedule, the one-liner into strips for me and put them into the binder that you had. I think that was one of my jobs, Jay, was to do that. And then you would arrange them as scene order and days, and that was just done by hand.
I forgot about the strip board.
Yeah, the strip board. Yeah. And then there was also the call sheets were all done in pencil and then typed up in the office. The production reports were all done in pencil at the end of the night, typed up in the office. All of that now is just done on a computer.
And then if you had to change a call time, you pass another call sheet out, and it would all be handwritten in red. You guys were down in the production office with 150 call sheets, making the changes by hand with a red Sharpie.
All calls push half hour. All calls push. Yeah. And Jim Finnerty was not happy about those days. That means we went too long. The day before, if we're pushing the call for the next day, because we had to worry about actor turnarounds and crew turnarounds.
We had, Frank, on that show, we had more power as the first AD in terms of decision making. It's like Jim didn't want to be bothered unless he had to be. If there was something that really looked like it was going to be an issue, or we may go a few minutes early, then Jim said, we had to call. That was a must, or we had to have somebody run and find him. Whatever was going on at that time. He'd usually be across the street by this time of day.
He certainly did not like surprises. Yeah. Right. So as long as you did not surprise him, he was generally okay. And the producers were very, very supportive of us. And I remember Tom Fontana saying, listen, if any of these actors give you a hard time, if for some reason they're rude, they give you a hard time, you have our permission to go tell them to F-O. and he said that, and I remember that. And there was a time, probably season 4, season 5, when Andre Braugher, with the entire show was on his shoulders, and he had asked for a day off on a Friday. He was very into his family. He was working all the time. And he said, Frank, I really want this Friday off. I have a family event. I'd really need to get off on this Friday. And I said, and I tried. I said, Andre, I'm really sorry, man. I can't. You're just in all these scenes. The only way you're going to be released from working on Friday is if they pull you out of scenes, which they were never going to do because the show just rested on his shoulders. And he screamed at me. He's like, oh, I can't believe I just asked for one day. And he's dropping cuss words. And that's unlike Andre, because he was one of the sweetest guys. But he was an intense actor, and he could also be an intense human. And man, he was letting me have it. And I said, Andre, go F yourself. I work every day. You only work a couple of days. I'm trying, and I'm being honest with you. I can't give you the day off. You have to go talk to the writers. And I'm in my little AD office, and I see Jim Finnerty, and he's looking, and he doesn't say a word, and he looks down, and he looks over his glasses, and he kind of smiles, shakes his head, and walks away.
Good job, Frank.
And then Andre came, we both apologized to each other, and it was nice because it was, it was a family, and sometimes, it gets heated. But but Jim heard me say that, and I'm like, oh no, the producer just heard me say that to Andre Brower. I'm going to get fired. But Jimmy, they backed us up all the way, all the time.
All the time, yeah. Jimmy,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, I had my altercations with a few actors as well, and Jimmy, Jimmy had my back. That was for sure.
Who was getting first team all the time?
That was me for quite a while. Yeah,
that's the toughest job.
Yeah, getting first team to set is just basically working with the actors, hair, makeup, and wardrobe, and coordinating the arrival of them on set. And when you have, an ensemble cast with a lot of actors, you have to get, say, 7 actors ready in the morning, and they all have to somehow get to set. And certain actors wouldn't go to set right away. Certain actors would wait in their trailers. Somebody needed new shoes or new laces, or their breakfast was cold. I mean, you just name anything that could go wrong in someone's mind. So getting the actors to set was definitely not the easiest. And one day I was trying to get to set. So he was basically just in his trailer, and I'm like, come on, we got the whole entire cast. You're new here. You need to come to set. And he's like, starts cussing me out. And he got in my face, and I got in his face. The Teamsters were holding me back from us fighting. It was a big mess. And I get called into Jim Finnerty's office, and here I am saying, oh my God, I'm going to get in so much trouble. I almost got in a fight with one of the main actors on the set. It's not even like me. I'm like the last person you would think that would get in an argument with anyone. And Jimmy says, you should have kicked the little motherfucker's ass.
Exactly.
Something like that, like that's my, that was Jimmy, he always had our back with the actors. That is for sure.
Here's the thing about you taking the ADs on, and we're the department, that had to deal with every single other department and almost every other human being. The only ones that I may not have dealt with were Teamster, the heads of Teamster department, the key and the second and such. I maybe dealt with the top 3 for the most part. And then there'd be people who'd be driving vans and stuff. So I didn't know all the truck drivers and the people who drove the makeup and hair trailers necessarily. But otherwise, Miles must have dealt, and Frank, when he was second, then they dealt with every single human being. I dealt with every department and most of the people. But when Frank was a second and when Miles was seconding, which was every human being was touched and talked to by the ADs. And they had to know all of our plans. They had to get a call sheet put in their hands. Unlike today where it's electronic, in a lot of sets. And so there was a personal relationship that had to be there, whether it was good, positive or negative. Susan and I would kid around together a lot, but we also had some times when, I'd be trying to get Susan out of the way, and Susan would tell me to fuck off because she had to do, she had her orders were from the DP and from Boots and from I don't know if you were taking orders from Dave, but they were a department and they had to get their work done because that was the camera. And these guys, between Alex and Jean, they often were doing incredibly difficult things and were in a lot of pain if they didn't have the assistants taking the camera off their back or making Susan making the crazy changes. So tough stuff with everything. The thing about the ADs is they have to deal with everybody on a personal level as well as work.
Exactly. Yeah. And back then, remember, it was a network show of 22 episodes. So we were working 6-7 months. These days, that's very, very rare. They don't do that much anymore. Maybe some of the other network shows still do. But the majority of shows, are smaller number of episodes. So day in, day out, month after month after month. We're all together, 12 hours, and we became a family. And as as families do, you get pissed off at each other and you kick each other in the ass, but you pull each other up too. And that was it was a special group. We didn't have we had somewhat of a turnaround, I guess, but we kept a lot of the same crew throughout a lot of those years.
Yeah, and I would say, just to interject there, the thing to remember about ADs is that you're not just touching every department. You got to get them moving. You have to keep on schedule. You guys had all this pressure from the top on keeping on schedule and keeping things going, and every department had a department head and a crew underneath them, and so they all had their own. So I'm just saying, is you guys got a lot of pushback all the time from everybody, because we were like, I need another minute, whether it was, camera, grip, electric, hair, makeup, wardrobe. So I want to give you guys props, because people were giving you shit all day long because everybody had to move really fast. And so it wasn't just, you touched every department, you had to keep the whip going on everybody. And so you took a lot of crap from everybody all day long. And I'm not saying in a mean way, but because we were all trying to move fast and do our jobs, there was, you guys got a lot of, you kept it moving, and, we were all straining at the bit, right? So I give you all a lot of credit for keeping everything going with this, surly bunch of crazy people.
Well, that goes back to what Jay was saying about the lifespan of an assistant director being 54. I remember 57. 54 is even worse. But yeah, the stress is quite intense, and the pressure can be quite intense, especially if Jim Finnerty gets riled up a little bit.
If I can just jump in just on that one topic, is that we also didn't film on a sound. We didn't film on a sound stage. We filmed in a building that that wasn't soundproofed. We didn't film in a conventional studio as a lot of shows are filmed in today. So there were a lot of outside forces that sort of had play in how we got our job done that day. So that there was a lot involved. Outside pressures. And then looking back now and then listening to the other podcasts, I didn't realize that Josh and Joe were under the pressure they were under. I didn't realize that the camera department had their pressure. I don't know all, I just know we need to get the production done, and we all worked as a team from all departments to do that. But listening back to everyone else now talk about all their trials and tribulations of being young in the business, being new to a big TV show, being new to a network show, and all the pressure that was upon them, we don't see that. Whether it was the actors who were under pressure, everyone was under pressure, the writers, and just seeing that all open up now as being older and wiser in this business it's incredible how we got that show done and how it was critically acclaimed, Emmy Award winning. And we just didn't, Frank and I talked earlier, we just didn't know any better. This is what we did, So we just got it done, all departments just got it done. And we shot on film, Susan, you were, reloading film, or you or Dave were reloading film. We were waiting on that, or, that doesn't happen today. You just kind of shoot and have a nice, nicer sound stage or studio. It's just, we were kids in this business, and we all came together and just made an incredible show.
Yeah, sometimes I think those challenges made it even better.
Just a why question. So how were these 12-hour days sort of broken down? How did the 12-hour day kind of play out?
Lunch after 6 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
How did it break down?
Right, and wrap at the end of 12. That was it.
Yeah. No, I would say that, with the 7 a.m. call, we production would show up around 5:30. For a 5:45 call. Frank instilled in me at a young age, and if you're on time, you're late. And that doesn't mean just on time. You have to be walkie in your ear, walkie on, your Sharpies in your pocket, your schedule, just whatever you needed to get the day started. And we didn't have a caterer back then either. So, it was me running to Jimmy's and picking up egg sandwiches for the actors that were working, or whatever their order was that I just kind of knew. Andre wanted egg whites or someone wanted this. I just would have that hot and ready in their trailer for when they arrived on set. So our day started a whole lot earlier, and ended a whole lot later because we had to wait for all the trucks to wrap up. Whatever, unless we were in the studio. So if we wrapped at 7:30, we were out by 9. And then my day didn't end there either. I had to drop off call sheets to actors on my way home because no one wanted them faxed. There wasn't email. So my job was to drive home after, a 14-hour day and swing by Andre Brower's house, swing by Danny Baldwin's house, and, put a call sheet under someone's door in Fells Point. I can't even remember who, so, our days were long. Were long days.
Did you get paid overtime?
No, no.
No. So you'd be driving to the actor's house?
No. $75 a day, Jay. $75 a day flat.
But Chris, to answer your question, from a first AD, the director and I, the first AD and the director would look at the day and say, if we had 6 scenes, normally, I don't know, what do we have? Maybe 6, 7 pages a day, sometimes 8 pages a day. So we'd look at each scene. We know we'd have 12 hours. We'd allocate a certain set of hours. Okay, from 7 to 10, we're doing scene 27. Then we got to do 3 scenes before lunch. So we time it all out. Especially, I remember with John Zagonzak, he would have his cards, and he would have them on a ring. For each scene, he would have shots that he wanted to do, and he and I would go through his shot list, and we don't have time for this one. We'd have to get rid of this and throw this away, and you would end up having to prioritize. But because the number one rule is you never have enough time. You never have enough time to do what you really want. You could spend forever to do it, but we didn't have the time. And so it was all about priorities, because you knew there was no, Jim Finnerty would give no quarter, right? It's 12 hours and that's it.
And one to add on to that then, there's some episodes where there's lots of locations, and then you have the extreme other, which is 3 Men and a Dina, which is almost in one location. How do you break that down? An episode in one room the whole time to an episode is in lots of places.
Boy, I don't know. And we never really, I mean, the method, the filming method with the handheld motion just helped out so much in that respect. Because we're not setting up dolly tracks and doing the wide and then moving the tracks and moving the lighting and setting up for the overs and on a regular type show. So that allowed us to just do so much more with that handheld camera and so much freedom. And then with 3 Men and Dina, that was the 6-day episode, I think, because we were all in the box, and we didn't go anywhere, and we saved, pulled out a day of the schedule. But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. But Jay mentioned, this location is way too far away. It had to be done in an efficient manner, and it had to be prepped as such, and it just had to work. And sometimes things would stick out, and this is just not going to fit. So it just all the big picture had to come together in order for it to make it work in 12 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, I do remember sitting with Frank and when I was on set as a second, and, putting 9 to 2, the 9 to 10 for one scene. I remember writing on the call sheet what our time was for each of our scenes. You remember that, Frank?
Every day we
every day, and then
Jimmy wanted to know. So he'd be watching us. We'd get a call because he wanted to know when we were going to finish. He'd say, we had to start and tell him what it was going to be. And I think I would sometimes tell, because Frank was my second for a while. What season did you bump up to first?
Season 4.
4. So all of season 3 and the season 2 episode I did, Frank was my second. So we would go through it. So he would write it probably often. We would talk through it. I'd say, okay, here. Frank would then take that downstairs to Jimmy. Do you remember this?
No, absolutely.
and tell him, because I may be just making this shit up, nobody's going to know. And then he would go through there, and then if Jimmy would come up, if we were going over the time that was on the estimates, Jimmy would be coming upstairs and give me, his watch was always backwards anyway, right? So he'd do the
Admiral on deck. People would call out AOD, Admiral on deck. Jim Finnery was regarded as the Admiral. He was very much into boats and fishing, and it took me on some great fishing trips offshore. But then he had his walkie-talkie in his office, so he knew exactly what was going on. Have a conscience, 7:15, 2:00, have a conscience. He was listening. He knew. Very smart guy.
Yeah.
Jimmy also was the don't fuck it up, right? He may have been giving that to me when I was directing. So it would be
yes, he had several. Keep it simple, stupid.
Don't fuck it up.
Don't
Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah. All right. Go ahead. Next question.
Are there any episodes that stand out for you as challenging? Because there's things like, was it Fallen Heroes? We have the shootout in the squad room and various other things. Are there any episodes for you that sort of stand out as challenging or ones that you're really proud of?
Shades of
Shades
Grey,
of Grey,
with the massive, sort of bus riot and all the extras. In addition, Miles, when you're talking about wrangling extras, in addition to wrangling extras, because we were in so many practical outside locations, they're wrangling traffic. They're wrangling like surly pedestrians who don't want to stop and wait. So it was so many layers of things you guys had to control that were maybe less so in other more controlled environments on other shows. This show had a lot of uncontrolled environments. But anyway, go ahead.
I remember in particular, it was very early on, season 4, when Ed Sheeran, when we did the crossover with Law and Order. Maybe it was maybe before, I think it was for God and Country, and maybe it was before the crossover, but I got called into Jimmy's office, and I think I only first AD'd maybe 1 or 2 episodes, and he said, "Hey, we got a big guy coming in here for this episode." Ed Sheeran, he was the president of the Directors Guild at the time. He was the executive at Law and Order. He was a big deal. Ed Sheeran. And he says, "Don't fuck it up." Or he said something like that, Jay.
That would be it.
We had a whole conversation, which put the pressure on me and scared the daylights out of me. But during that episode, we had a seaplane. We had a seaplane. We had boats, and anytime you have, you take a movie company out on the water, not only with boats but with a plane, and these days now, if you have a plane, you have an aerial coordinator next to your side. You have a marine coordinator, which I think we did, but they helped us much. Now it's just different where they help. The ADs have much more support, I think. I don't know if you would agree with that, Jay. In my experience, we have more support now.
What's happened with the safety rules and the first ADs now being the safety officer.
Yes.
And so the responsibilities on us, even though we don't have that kind of control, because we're on the set, and the stuff that goes on out of our view, we can say, "Did you take care of this?" But we're not getting to watch it and see it happen. So what's happened now over the years is the first AD has become the responsible safety officer, even though we don't have that ability to really see everything that's going on because we have to physically be on the set. We can talk through it at the beginning, but I think it's gotten kind of way over the freaking time. The thing about, we know this story about Alex
Baldwin.
With
right.
Baldwin.
But I guess I understand what you're saying, but I think I have a little, we have more help now than we did back then. For instance, so I remember Ed Sheeran, the seaplane, which is I'm talking to the pilot on the walkie, and there was a miscommunication, and the seaplane started to move. And Ed Sheeran's like, "How the fuck is that plane moving right now? Like, who cued that plane?" And I'm like, and it was a miscommunication, and ultimately it was my fault because I clearly didn't communicate properly. But I had boats, and it was just us. Miles, you were probably on one of the boats helping, and other PAs on, maybe, I think we had somebody in the plane, but getting screamed at by Ed Sheeran because the plane moved at the wrong
God.
time. It was like, wow, I'll never forget that. I mean, and it all worked out, but that was so challenging as an AD to be in charge of that, especially a young AD. I was pretty green at that point. Here I was, coordinating planes and boats and timings with different things, and which I love to do, which I love, love, love it. It's fantastic, and it's a great challenge. And now I'm much better at it, thankfully. But
Now, which episode was that? Because I know the boats, the
Last of the Watermen.
well, that was another one. Yeah.
Boats and Last of the Watermen. But which one had the seaplanes? Seaplane. I don't remember
It
that.
wasn't Ed Sheeran, for God and Country. I don't know the title of it, but I remember. I remember Kenny Guinness. He was related to the Guinness beer family, and he had the seaplane, and he lived in St. Michael's, and he was our guy, and he was wonderful. And I remember that very clearly. And I remember that day being out on the water, like, oh wow, that was a lot going on. There was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I have a question. So Frank, you remember Last of the Watermen, right?
But that was not me though. I do remember.
So that
no,
okay.
I was prepping. At that point, I was a first AD, so I was prepping, and I remember while it was going on, but I wasn't actively involved in that.
Miles, do you remember that episode? It was with Melissa, and we drove.
Yeah, Melissa Leo episode where we visited her family. I get like her character's family, and we shot in St. Michael's.
And we had to drive quite a distance.
Where did we shoot? St. Michael's.
Yeah.
Well, no. Well, the location where the restaurant was, and the exteriors outside the restaurant and inside the restaurant was at a restaurant called the Island View off of Barrison Point Road, I believe, in Essex. And actually, the bar where they went and where the family was, that's now gone or closed down. But the little sort of restaurant that looks like it's a house, that's still there. But I don't know if some of it, I can't remember where we went.
We went somewhere far away by the water
with
right?
the oyster
right.
boats.
Yeah.
So the restaurants were all on the water, but it was Essex. But the oyster boats, I can't remember how far we went, to shoot that part.
It was a big deal to go down there. It was like the furthest location we'd ever done. I don't know if Frank had any further on his, but it was a big deal to both be able to schedule it and include all the driving that it would take to go down there. And I was trying to remember if we did more than one day there, if we did an overnight, which would have been,
No, I don't think we ever did an overnight anywhere.
So
but there were some
big
beautiful
drive.
sunset shots in that episode. I think Jean must have been in a Zodiac or something, going around the big boat, going around the big oyster boat. Really beautiful stuff. But any other particularly challenging episodes or episodes that were challenging that they turned out at the end, you're like, wow, that was a pain in the ass, but it was great. Anything like that?
I would say the subway episode. Yeah, subway. Yeah, with Vincent D'Onofrio. Yeah, that was the biggest one. I mean, we shot all nights for a week. That was a tough one. Lots and lots of extras that needed to get dressed. I mean, we had firemen, we had paramedics. I mean, it was like every night was just one for 4 nights in a row was one continuous rescue, for every night. So whoever we had the day before, they all had to come back the next day, and you had firemen, paramedics, extras. You had trains. We had the train schedule. I mean, there was so much going on that episode.
And you had real firemen and paramedics. I mean, some of those were real people, not dressed up actors.
No, it was a lot of, and then we shot outside of the, the upstairs part. We shot outside there. That was an episode. Yeah. And
they were 2 different locations. One, the underground one, was in front of Hopkins, I think, on Wolf Street, and the other one was down by the shot tower.
Yep. All right. Yeah. You have a great memory, Susan.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. But that's the one that sticks out. I think the sniper episode was another big episode that we did that required a lot of a lot of locations, and and being high up. We had to go in the Bromer Seltzer Tower. We had to go here. I just remember being in a lot of places.
The
but they were high
Tower.
up.
The Bromoselter Tower, which was completely covered in pigeon shit once you got up the ladder to go out onto the roof. I was like, oh my God, what kind of diseases am I going to get from being up here? I'm sorry, go ahead. Jay, what were you thinking?
No, on the subway, which is the most memorable for me as far as, because the other things we were dealing with, that ended up being, the network sent us a documentary crew that was filming us for Anatomy of a Homicide. And that ended up going on PBS.
It's a good episode. It's a really good documentary. Yeah.
But it was random that they ended up there for Subway. I'm pretty sure that it's not like they got sent down there because of that episode. I think it just was the dates that they were there. I could be wrong on that. But it was Vincent D'Onofrio, who's very, very intense and only wanted to be in his head, didn't want anybody talking to him. And then on the other hand was Gary Fleeter, who this is the first time Gary and I had worked together, which is the case with most of the directors in there. But Gary and I, by the way, just up until my stuff where I stopped, Gary and I did many shows after that. So the irony is that being the first time, and Gary being the director that I stayed with probably up until just a few years ago when I stopped working. But he and I did series together, and we did movies together and TV movies and stuff. But Gary's thing is, he said to me, I'm not talking to them. I don't want that crew in my face, being of the documentary crew. And really, for the most part, Gary would speak to me, and, because he also was very intently with the story, with the actors. And so he would talk to me, and then I would take what he said over to anybody else, including Alex. Was it Alex or Jean?
Alex is a DP on that episode.
Okay.
Remember the documentary.
To Alex. And so I would be between Alex and Gary. And one would talk to me and say, tell him. And I would take from Gary. I don't know if Miles, if you were around that, but you had so many, I know you were dealing with the extras and stuff. But that was very much of the show. And I think finally at one point, Gary spoke to the documentary crew in there. But the two of them, having to work with both of them on a very intense episode, and D'Onofrio being very intense and Gary being very intensely involved in it, was something that I'll never forget. And it's also, for me, the best episode. And it's Yoshimura who wrote it. And Yoshimura's episodes were always so unusual. I mean, all the writers were great. But Yoshimura's episodes always stood out in my mind because of the intensity that he put in it. And the other thing that was memorable about Yoshimura was Finnerty shooting him. Because Jim, do you know this one?
Tell the story. No one's told this story, and I've been waiting for it.
So Kathy, who was married to Joe, ultimately, right? So Kathy was the POC, worked just outside of Jim's office. Yoshimura comes in the office. Jim's pissed off at him for whatever reason or not. And then there's a gunshot, like a really loud gunshot, rang through the whole office. I remember I was there, and because it was prep time, and you hear a scream. Kathy, screams in there. Yoshimura, you hear Yoshimura's yell, and the people run into the office, and Jimmy is hysterical laughing, and Yoshimura is totally freaked out, and and then everybody gets that Jim would keep this gun in his drawer, but it had blanks. It was like quarter loads. But
I bet they weren't quarter loads. I bet they were full loads, so he could get the big, bang.
You couldn't do full loads in the office. It was too loud. But as it is, maybe it was half loads because it was so loud.
It was loud.
Yeah, and So other experience of where he shot the gun.
He shot at me once. Yeah.
There you go. It's like. So yes, that was a
shot
thing.
at I think Rodney French. I think he shot Rodney.
Yeah.
I was one of his victims once. Yashimura.
Then there's one thing I have to bring up because it was really, really special in terms of the intensity of the day. It was the day that they were going to announce OJ's verdict, and so Jimmy had extra vans and the entire. He had the Teamsters lined up, and they had to stay in their vans. And well, you remember it too, Susan. So
we were on location that day.
Yeah.
I remember
on a roof.
Yeah.
I was on a roof with
Yeah.
other Teamsters who had everybody was packing that day. Every Teamster was packing that day.
And that neighborhood that we were in, it was very dangerous because if they had come out with a guilty verdict, we were gonna have to get our asses the fuck out of that town and into the vans and race the hell away in case there was a riot. And
we had like an exit plan, I think, is what we had designed.
Yeah. It was.
But
it was
what
a
I remember
very intense day.
was when the verdict was read and the Teamsters had their walkies up to each other's walkies. So it got somebody had it on the
Right.
radio and then it went around everybody's walkies. And when the verdict was read, what you heard in that neighborhood was cheering and clapping. So, and whether you could predict or not, there would have been a riot and there might not have been. But certainly everybody that was a very tense day, and the Teamsters were ready for sure, which actually, to be honest, scared me more. The Teamsters all packing scared me more than what would have happened. Just because,
Well, yeah, that could have got Rhea out of hand very fast. Yeah, jeez.
But yeah, that was a yeah. Who was on the roof? Was that you? Who was on the roof? Was that you? Was that you, Jay? So you were up there. Yeah, we were on the roof when it was read. That's what I recall.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Because we were on a lot of roofs all the time.
I was prepping with Peter Medak, and we were at the Baltimore Museum of Art eating lunch. and with Peter Medak,
Good place to be in a riot.
It was always a 2-bottle wine at lunchtime.
Yeah.
And a great lunch, I'm sure. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
always with Peter. He loved his lunches. He's fantastic.
Well, that might feed into one of our questions actually about any directors you enjoyed working with or not, but maybe we should focus on the ones that you did enjoy working with. But yeah, and actors too.
Well, for me, the nice part was when the crew, like John, when he started directing, John, Jay, Kyle, and Clark. That's our family, and when those people have the opportunity to direct, that was special because everybody really, dove in and tried to help them out as much as possible. Those episodes were super special. We did have some other fantastic directors. I mean, wow, so many. Kathy Bates, who was amazing. I had the opportunity to work with her. Her thing was very funny. She said, "You guys with the hats, you guys do your things with the lights. You just tell me when the camera's ready. I'm going to be speaking to the actors." And that's what she was. And she was and the actors loved every word she had to say. But, and then there was Bruno Kirby, who, amazing. Bruno, like, wow, from The Godfather. And then Steve Buscemi, who was nominated for a DGA award. So he and I got to go to Los Angeles for the DGA awards in, I guess, 1998. That was amazing. That was the year, I think, that Steven Spielberg won for Saving Private Ryan. So when you go to the DGA awards, you're in this room in the center area with all the nominees. So here we were, the Homicide table, and there was Steven Spielberg's table, and Peter Weir and Terrence Malick was nominated that year. And Roberto Benigni, Life is Beautiful. I remember that one.
That's it. Yeah.
That was phenomenal. Even Steve Buscemi was just, oh my God, this is incredible. Can you believe this, Frank? I'm like, here I am, some kid from Baltimore. Steve Buscemi is just like acting nervous and is really immersed in that whole thing. And Catherine Bigelow had an amazing, she's an Academy Award winning director. And Barry Levinson, of course, was amazing. Him and Barbara Koppel, who is a very famous documentarian. And she actually won the DJ Award in 1998 or 1999. She won the Best Director Award for her episode of Homicide. That was fantastic. Yeah, so but it was always special with the home team. But then our another group of folks, say, we had the Alan Taylor and Nick Gomez and Ken Fink, who probably did more episodes than anyone.
He did. He did the most.
And Peter Medak, it was in that group. Like those folks, they were like the home team directors in my mind. I mean, because they knew the show. The directors respected them for the most part. The writers respected them. And they were great directors. And, they've gone on to do amazing things. And we were just blessed to have so many. I mean, and there's so many more. I mean, Kevin Hooks, he was fantastic. Martin Campbell, who did a big 007 James Bond movie, So we had amazing people to work with, especially for rookies like us who were just sometimes I couldn't believe that I was standing on the same set with some of these people.
Yeah, the directors, and then the guest stars we had. There's another list of
that's another
amazing
whole great
people.
list.
That's crazy.
mean, I think Robin Williams is one of the most to me. When I was a second AD when Robin was on, and during his episode, and I forget what it was called, and we had a scene.
Bop Gun.
Yes, Bop Gun, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, Bop Gun.
Yeah.
So horrible story. And we shot in the actual morgue, the Baltimore City morgue. And you open up a door, and there's real bodies in that door, in the freezer. And it was kind of an awful place to work. And we worked there year after year. But anyway, my job was to cue Robin outside the door. There was a scene where they were looking at the body. They were identifying the body of Munch and Melvin Clark. And here they had about a dialogue or so, a page of dialogue. And I had my headphones on listening. And then I had to cue Robin to come in right outside the door. So it was a couple of minutes, but Robin Williams is just telling me joke after joke after joke and trying to make me laugh. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy is unbelievable. And then I would say action, and he would walk in the door, seeing his wife on a slab in the morgue, and he would just transform into his character. And it was the most amazing transformation that an actor can do. It just this goofy, funny as hell comedian, and then go in and do a pretty damn good job of playing an extremely dramatic role inside a morgue with his dead wife with bullet holes in her. And he was fantastic. I mean, just incredible.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Can I jump in on a Robin Williams
story?
Oh,
you have a good one too, Miles.
Yeah.
Go.
So along with the line, with Robin telling jokes and turning off and on from his character of being, the victim, his wife was just killed in Baltimore, with their son walking around Baltimore, and then he's telling jokes. So my job was to stick. I was a PA at the time, and my job was basically wherever Robin goes, just stick near him. Don't don't get too close. He's just a super nice guy, but just stay with him in case he needs something or we need him to come to set. So Barry was on set then because Robin was there, and so was Tom Fontana. We were in that morgue set. I was upstairs in some just green room that they just happened to be hanging out in, and Robin Williams went on a tangent and roasted everyone in the room. Like the writers were in the room, Barry was, and he did his, I got to witness Robin Williams in front of 10 people for, 5 minutes roasting it was the most incredible thing you could ever imagine to be part of. And it just to see him being Robin, it was really, really incredible, memory that I have of that, those times. And I would say that when Robin showed up the first day, you know, I show up early, and I guess it was you were out there, Frank, and we're all like hanging out in the cobblestones. It's kind of cold outside in the morning, and I like went to his trailer just to make sure some stuff was set up, and I come out, and they're like all hanging out in a little circle on the cobblestones in front of the city pier in Fells Point. And I said, "So when's Robin getting here?" And he was literally standing next to me. He like raised his hand, he goes, "I'm right here." It was just so funny. He was just, anything he did was funny. Like he was just a funny guy to be around at any given time. But great experience. Yeah, we had a lot of stars. We had Jay Leno paid a little. I mean, you just name it. I mean, we had just random great
Isaiah
guest
Washington,
stars.
Chris Rock. I mean, it's
Chris Rock. Yeah, we had
crazy.
Mekhi Phifer in the shootout scene.
Mekhi was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the list is endless when it comes to guest stars. Kathy Bates, Steve Buscemi. One of my biggest memory, you know, my greatest memories of that show was when Steve Buscemi and no, it wasn't Steve Buscemi. It was Richard Edson and Bruno Kirby in the Andre Braugher episode. They arrived to town and they wanted to read lines because they had all these lines with Andre Braugher. So Jimmy calls me in the office and says, "Hey, can you, after work, can you go over to the Harbor Court Hotel and read lines, just read Andre Braugher's lines with Richard Edson and Bruno Kirby?" I'm like, this is a joke. Like, are you kidding me? So I actually showed up to the Harbor Court with sides, and I just read Andre's lines, just dry, you know, like. But they needed another voice there to really work their craft. So I spent like almost 2 hours there with like two of the most amazing actors, you know, and it was just that was one of my highlights of my career, I would say.
Yeah, that was the Gas Man. The two of them together. What a great
They were
combo.
unbelievable. The two of them together, and just to be witness of just watching their characters develop and just everything about it. It was an incredible experience.
And do you guys remember? Did Bruno direct before or after the Gas Man? Because the Gas Man was Barry who directed.
I think that may have been earlier, right? Because I think I was a second AD during that, Jay, right? Was that you, Jay?
With Bruno?
With Bruno?
I don't remember.
Directing?
I don't remember.
Because I definitely was a second AD during that. So that was before, that was either the season 3 or early season 4.
Honestly, I looked at all the titles of the episodes and it was like, we didn't, who thought of the titles of the episode? Really, it was on the front page of the script.
Sometimes I read the synopsis and I still can't remember what the show was about. Or I'll watch the show to see if I was on it because I don't remember being on it. And then I'll watch the credits. I'm like, oh, wait, I did that one.
Thousands of pages. You know, it's just like,
yeah, that's right.
Pages were just something to rip off. You know, it's like you tell it, we done it, rip it, throw it away.
Yeah, you like to rip. Yeah, I remember you ripping off the pages, Jay. That was your thing.
I love ripping up the pages.
We had a lot of kid actors too. You know, we had Elijah Wood. We had Jenna Maloney. Is that, I forget her? Like, you know,
Jenna Malone.
Yeah, like people that weren't necessarily famous at the time. We had from 90210. We had Jason Priestley was a director.
Yep.
Yeah. We had
Jake Gyllenhaal was in the Robin Williams
Jake
episode.
Gyllenhaal was on the show, and his dad was directing, I would imagine.
Right, Steve Gyllenhaal. Yeah.
Just amazing guest stars, and what a great time. And they would all hang out with us. Like Kathy Bates, I picked her up, and you know, she was at the Harbor Court. She's like, "I want to go out with you guys." I'd pick her up, and we all go to Cooper's. You know, like she was. Same with Richard Edson. He was the same way. He's like, he wanted to be part of the crew. Neil Patrick Harris, we all hung out with him one night. Yeah.
Who was the actor, Miles, who went to the baseball game with? Took a couple of those guys to Orioles.
Edward Herman.
Edward Herman.
Ed Herman.
Oh, he was such a wonderful.
Yeah, he was a big Oriole fan, so he's like, I'd love to go to a game. I was like, were you there, Frank?
Yes.
Yes. So it was just the three of us?
I think it was just the three of us, really.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty wild.
Maybe Ivan, too. Ivan maybe was there.
Because growing up, you know, the Lost Boys, you know.
Yeah, I worked with him on Overboard.
And Overboard, right?
Before Homicide. Wow. And one thing, I'm backtracking a little bit, I just want to say, I think people also don't realize how much, when you do a script breakdown, every scene, you guys had to coordinate with specifically everybody. What kind of wardrobe is it going to be? What kind of props do we need for that? What is the set dressing going to be like? What kind, really it wasn't just show up and shoot. You had to know what was going to be in every scene and who was going to be there. And sometimes it was show up and shoot, maybe if it was an exterior. But the idea that, that's sort of, really down to the micro of looking at a scene and what everything needed to be in place prior to was also part of the prep. And having to do that without being able to pull, to be able to pull department heads off and having to talk to people on the set. I mean, it's just really quite a logistical nightmare, I would imagine.
But we had it down, though. We had it down. That was
Yeah.
that's the thing about doing it over and over for so many months. We did have it down, and you're right. It goes back to the whole preparation period, and our prop department was amazing. Brooke Yaton, amazing, and Jeffrey Gordon and Mike Sabo, and those guys were all wonderful. Everyone was wonderful. Lester Poser.
And also was when you guys said you have more backup with other, like coordinators, aerial coordinators or boat coordinators. But back then, when I was listening to all this stuff about Russ, like the armorer, we didn't have an armorer. We had prop guys that knew what the hell they were doing and were incredibly professional at coming out, saying when the guns were going to be used, showing us the guns, opening the chambers, showing us what was in the chambers, making sure the gun wasn't in the hand until somebody said rolling. As soon as the shot was cut, the gun was taken out of their hands. So really, like you're saying, there's like multiple responsibilities that may be handled by multiple people now. We're not handled by multiple people. They will handled by
Yeah, correct. But when it's in the hands of somebody like Brooke Yaton, Mike Sabo, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff because they're complete professionals and they did the right thing every single time. And and I always added, I always like to add, especially now especially, I invite the entire crew, especially Susan, the camera department, people that are going to be around that gun. Listen, everybody should have an opportunity to look at that gun themselves, and everyone needs to feel comfortable that there's nothing in that gun.
And we weren't allowed to point them at anyone either. Even, so if we were going to roll the camera, the person would push the button on the camera, and then I think we would fix the camera at that point and walk away. I think even if I remember correctly, or
if
the
you were
camera,
shooting down
or
the
they
barrel,
would shoot
if you were
above the
shooting down the
camera
lens.
or away from the person, not at the I can't remember how we did it, but
well, you always have Lexan. We'd have Lexan.
Yeah, you'd have
front.
Lexan
Plexi shields,
right.
either
Plexi
around
shields.
the camera, on your face, all that.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah. To talk about sort of directors, actors. So Jay, you became a director yourself on the show. So what was that transition like? And I've really enjoyed the video I've seen of it.
Frank was because I did 3 episodes, right? So on Homicide, Frank was my first on the first and the last one, right? Because you did homicide.com with me.
Okay. Yes.
So first of all, it was all inside. It was all family, like they've mentioned before. And what I always liked to do on Homicide was keep everything light and fun as much as possible. I also came from a place when I was grown, going through the film business from the time I was a PA to a second and everything else, where and I had been most of my years before Homicide, I was working in New York. I was a New Yorker. So it was very important to always be right there on the set, right by the first, right when I was a first, right by the camera operator, right by the DP, depending on, but I was always on set. I could watch the actors. I could look back. I could see the directors once directors started having Video Village, which I think was not good. For me, if you're a director, you had to be right there on the set as much as possible. So once there was that, and the videos have me sitting at Video Village too often, but but I would be there, all the rehearsals with Jean initially when I was ADing, and then with Alex. So Jean and I, when I was firsting, I would be next to Jean, even when with the train of the DP, of Boots, and I always tried to, for me, the game was going as fast as Jean, getting the signals from the directors and tapping Jean, to change something while he was still busy. And, sometimes Jean and I would have a little, mostly we were brothers. I felt we had such a beautiful time having fun and having a lot of joking around together. Of course, the podcast, for some reason, Jean decided to tell a story about me fucking up. But it's like the only time somebody mentions my name is Jean.
Remember that.
It was like your first podcast is Jean telling a story about weather. It's like as if I decided we should go to weather cover on my own.
Right.
But it was like, just to clear my name on that, I'm in touch with Jimmy the whole time. It's like, Jimmy, this is what they're called. It's been raining on the way there. And then, Jimmy says, well, fuck it, go to cover, and that meant having to call actors that weren't there yet and having to get them to come to set. It's a big deal to go to cover if it wasn't, set. And then it ended up being a beautiful day and the skies cleared up and Jimmy said no more cover sets after that. So that was the Sean thing. Directing wise, it was because I was known for being playing it light and being a jokester on set as an AD. Then that's the way you remember me, right, Frank?
Absolutely.
And Miles, I never gave.
It was always light.
Oh, yeah, Jay, 100%.
We worked too hard to have
fun. There were times when you had to move, but there were times.
But that's okay.
That's right. I do remember
drove
that.
Everybody crazy.
So anyway, directing wise, I had my cards because when I was first starting out as a PA, I'd done the Porky's movies, and Bob Clark had the whole film shot listed on index cards. So he didn't have an actual list. He would do scraps of paper with little diagrams of the way he wanted the scene to play and a description. He would give that to his first AD, who was Ken Gotch. Ken then, between him and the second AD, Donnie, Kenny did it. He would very precisely redo the diagrams, from the torn up paper onto index cards and with compasses and rulers and make sure everything was beautiful. And then have those ready for each day of shooting for the director. And so I always remembered how brilliant that was. And so I just did my index cards and had them with me on the set. And you see on that video that Zan was shooting that I'm on the first day of shooting just tossing out index cards for all the shots I wasn't going to get.
Right.
Because,
happening.
You always have all those things. And watching Zakshevsky, he and I, I'd say, all right, here's the shot I want. This is the way I'd like to do it. And, Schwenk here, Schwenk there. And does this not ring a bell with anybody? So you Schwenk, this is a Schwenk. This is the shot, right? Because Alex, you'd go here and then there'd be an actor over here. You do that. That's a Schwenk, and if I wanted a Schwenky Schwenk, Schwenky Schwenk was that and back to that. So, and Alex's style was very different from Jean's because Jean loved moving around all the time. And Jean had this eye out looking around, what was going on over there. And, he'd have one eye on and so, in the eyepiece. So Jean would be over here doing this weird shit, looking in that other direction while he still had an eye in the eyepiece. And he'd suddenly, while we're all ready doing the train behind him as he's moving, suddenly he'd move like this over to that, and everybody had to cross over and run into each other. That's AD days. So when I'm directing, it's with Alec. And so I would joke around with Alex all the time, but I'd tell Alex the way I want it to be shot. And he would say, no, that's not going to work. I'd say, Alex, give me the shot. So there'd be a lot of that back and forth. He'd say, okay, whatever. Whatever, fine. It's not going to, It's like, I got that shot, and Bruce Latecki, who's the sound mixer, would come up to me sometimes and he'd say, Jay, I don't think we got this. There was a plane. I said, where was the plane? He'd tell me the line. I said, I got that already. It's over here. As far as the cast goes, they were all, really wonderful to me. They were really happy I was doing it. I don't think I got much of Andre stuff in any of my episodes. I got a little bit. He was gone in season 7, right? So 2 of my episodes were season 7, 1 was 6. So I had Andre for that. We had a nice time. But I didn't have as much of him as I would have liked. It was newer cast members, like not the original bunch. I had some Clark, but it was Peter Garrity, and it was Garrity and Callie, right?
Yeah, Callie Thorne.
Sure in the first one.
And Michael Michelle.
Yeah, Michael Michelle didn't have till season 7.
Oh, and John Seda.
That was homicide.com, and we had a red
Wow.
ball. Seda was in all of mine. Seda was like a buddy. So I was lucky with that. And Clark too, who, Clark was, I don't know if you ever talked about it. Clark was special effects guy before he started acting on our show. So Clark was crew, had a crew mentality always. And so he was a lot of fun and easy to be there. As far as my episodes, this show was the easiest show in the world. And then when I started directing on non-homicide shows, everything was so different for a director. It's like the show was so loose, even for directors. I felt, and Frank, I'm sure the same, I was giving the directors the guidance as to what they had to do in order to do a homicide episode. So when I started directing homicides, I'd already taken all these directors through what the style of the show was and who, which actors you could talk to and dare to give direction to, and which ones you just let them do their thing. Mm-hmm. On the video, you hear Munch doing just bitching about something at one point off camera. He says, been doing this show for 6 years. He's going to tell me how I do my job. And it wasn't me I don't think it was me who was talking about it. But you hear him mumbling this, like, I've been doing this fucking show for 6 years. I know what I'm doing. And Munch also was the only actor, I think also Andre, but mostly Andre wouldn't do it. But Munch was the only actor who was allowed to improvise, who was allowed to change the words. All the other ones, we were told, when the writers weren't on set, which was fairly often, that the actors have to do the dialogue, have to do the lines exactly as written. No changes. I think over time they let Andre do more, but Andre didn't want to. Andre learned his lines, had it to the letter, and if he wanted any changes, he would call the writers and say, how about this? There'd be a discussion ahead of time. Anybody else who dared to try and make a change, that was not okay. And I'm pretty sure we had to call the writers or something like that because they had to. And they had spoken to the actors about this. You don't change a word. That was a fairly common thing we were told, because I remember being told that I had to watch for that. And, I would tell Lee Bigelow, who was the script supervisor, that, if anything's off, to please watch and let me know. Otherwise, I just had fun with it as best I could. I had a ponytail, mantail. What do they call it?
Man bun.
Man bun.
Yeah.
So I had a man bun in that season, in season 6. So we had Ivan cut it off right before I started directing. There, we went into the trailer, and there was a ceremony. And then at the end of it, there was a big party that we threw upstairs in the bar across the street, which was notorious because I'd rarely go to the bar because I didn't drink. And you guys didn't know, I never said anything then, but now I'm out of the business, I say. So I had, between 2 of the seasons, I had a seizure. So I had seizure disorder. I had epilepsy. All these years I was in the business, so I was always sort of on the edge of playing the game that I wouldn't have anything happen to me ever, and did fairly well up until later years. And then I had a stroke this year and stuff,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Back no, I'm good. I got very lucky. So, but then, it was weird because I was always playing it, we'd be going up on rooftops. I went up, I remember that when there were scenes in the offices, like in Giardella's offices or in the other office that went to, what's her name? I want to say Hillary, but it's not. The other commander.
Isabella?
Russert.
Russert, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Isabella. So I would go up top, and I would climb, like where the grips were, over being on the beams. So I would climb up there so I could watch the scene and be there watching the DP and making sure that the mics and everything, because I was obsessive with making sure I always had to be there where the scene was happening. And I carried that over when I directed as well, as much as possible.
So why do you, if you've gotten to see, some of the Peacock reboot, but obviously, Homicide, even though it was only available on DVD, was sort of out of the picture for years, still has a rabid fan base, Why do you think it's retained that interest all these years? And when you watch it now, and I've said this a million times in the other podcasts, it's really current. I mean, it doesn't feel dated. And now that it's got the reboot and how pretty it is, it doesn't look dated. Anybody want to jump in on maybe start with Miles on why you think it's still so good 30 years later? It didn't date as a 1990s TV series.
Yeah, I think a lot has to do with the writing. A lot has to do with the acting. The ensemble cast. It has a lot of energy to the show, where you feel the camaraderie of the actors and the storytelling. It all just comes together, and I just feel like the entire show just still comes together and is still relevant today. I mean, there's been so many other cop shows after this one, hundreds of them, but Homicide to me will always be the best.
Mm-hmm. Jay, and then we'll finish up with Frank.
I'm gonna go off topic for a minute.
Not too long.
Because in the directing things, I just remembered Homicide.com was an internet show when the internet was still relatively new. And so just wanted to point out that it was because it really took us to a different place. I know that we had started doing murders on camera in the later seasons. Before that, we were not watching Murders or Murderers, which was one of the wonderful things about the show that made it fantastic, that it wasn't supposed to be about gunplay and watching violence. I think on all 3 of my episodes that I directed, we had some, because we would watch the first one, Strangled Not Stirred. We watched them the couple killing the girls. In the middle one had the basically the abortion, the teenage kids in Kellerman part 2, or I did part 2. So we saw flashbacks of the birth, happening. And in Homicide.com, it was all about this guy doing this ritual murder for the internet audience on the BBS, which anybody remember what a BBS stood for? Like the bulletin board. So people would tune in to watch these ritual murders, most, saying how funny they are and they're not real, but then it turns out that they're real. So I remember that going out there and being really unusual and taking it to a place on the web and about the web, which was still a new thing. As far as the new look of it on Peacock, I thought there was so much of what we shot where Jean or Bruce would say there's something back there, or somebody got in the shot, or when we said extras and the same person would come through twice, and we'd say nobody's going to see it because our TVs were maybe 30 inches, 28 inches, whatever it was. I got a 75-inch screen now. I see everything. I was watching one of the episodes, and they actually played the same. It was the little girl, the high school girls. They were looking for a killer, and they were asking about this killer, who they might have said, and it might have been Kellerman Part 1. But they do the dialogue in a high school hallway where they're interviewing these two high school girls. And then it cuts to, this is on Peacock, that they cut to the exact same dialogue in a record store. And it's like, what the hell? It's like we did a reshoot, or we shot it twice because somebody may have said, the network may have said, this doesn't work, because why would cops be with two girls in a high school hallway with nobody around them to watch it? So instead, we see the cops in a record store with two high school girls with, at least it's in a public place, but still inappropriate. So there was that. But the other thing about how did we get to be able to do these 6 by, this big frame ratio by, when we were shooting on 16 mil, is it the Super 16 that allowed for it?
Good question. I need a tech person to explain that, because I thought shooting on Super 16 we were already shooting to the edges, but we weren't. And somebody somewhere commented that what we protected for 16:9. So
right. And as far as handheld, I had done other shows that were mostly handheld, because I had done a show called The Street in New York, which we shot a lot in Jersey. But it was, the entire show was night shoots, and it was all handheld. And it was not on one of the 3 big networks. It was on like WOR, in New York, whatever. It was Channel 9, but it was playing all over the country. But it was that sort of thing. As far as it going to Peacock, for me, 30 years, it's been killing me that this was one of the greatest shows on TV. And the writing was amazing. And I want to say the names of all the writers, but, Julie and Yash and Eric Overmyer and Henry Brummel and Tom, of course, who was watching over all of them. I mean, it was, and
Jorge Zamacona.
Linda,
Anya,
Jorge, who
Anya and Jorge, and then later Daryl and Joy Lusko.
Joy.
Right. Daryl, who's in Japan now, who I was going to try and visit when I was in Japan. But and Joy, these were the baby writers at the time, people who worked in the office, who they helped rise up, just like Julie had been Tom's assistant, and Jorge had been an office PA, before they became writers on the show. And then there were a lot of marriages that happened on the show, like Frank and Beeb. Did you guys know each other before the show?
We actually met off. Yeah, we did. We met in a bar in Baltimore. She was working on Major League 2 at the time.
Got it. And Joe and Kathy were married. Were both on the show, got married. I don't know if they knew each other beforehand. Ivan and Julie got married. There's no way they knew each other before the show. Ivan had been in post, right, in season 2 or season 1 before he came over. Ivan, who dissed us all by not showing up here today. But there was a lot of interaction between everybody, because the craziness was, aside from the hacky sack, that everybody spent all this time together during the day, and then they would hang out after. And that also I've never seen. I don't think I've ever seen in Hollywood or New York or anything else. You finish, you go and do your life. I never lived in, well, I did. I stayed in apartments. But for the most part, my family was in Wilmington, was in North Carolina during that show. And so on Fridays, I'd get in my car and I'd drive home. So it was very rare, because Friday night was bar night, and also at the end of an episode usually. So is that sort of thing. So these guys, Miles and Frank, who put up with my shit for all those years, which was crazy, and Susan, who I always berated, and everybody on the set that I always gave hell to. I'm sure Frank never did that to his crew.
Never. Come on.
They were family, for Frank, because he had already been a PA with all these people from Baltimore, So it was good. It was good
Special.
people. Never saw it on anything else.
So Frank, why do you think the show's still relevant?
Well, I think it just goes with what these guys have said. It's all about it all starts with the writing, what's on the page. It always starts with what's on the page. And then when you have great writing and you have a great ensemble cast, I mean, it's a no-brainer. You can't go wrong. And that's exactly the combination. Amazing writing and amazing cast all the way through. Sure, it definitely drifted a little bit toward the end, as every show will do. I mean, 7 seasons, 122 episodes, that's a long time. And it's going to evolve, whether or not it's for the better at the end, it's personal preference. It was always good in my mind. It was always good. And even the nature of the handheld, I mean, it just grabbed you a little more than conventional. It was just unconventional. It was different, to put it simplistically. And the high quality of the writing and the cast and the way it was done was just, it was just fantastic. And it still is fantastic. And I can't wait to watch the rest of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Do you all have time for one more question? It's hopefully a fun question.
Fun question.
So one thing cast and crew have talked about is the food in Baltimore. And did you and your team have any favorite bites to keep you going through the long hours? Because we've heard about gizzards and scrapple as being popular choices with the Cameron Ricers. So what was your go-to?
Well, that's funny. I remember the gizzard sandwich. That's funny. I totally remember that.
That was Joe. Joe would run and get those. He would get the chicken livers. I think they talked about it on their podcast. The gizzards and chicken livers from the Lexington market, or even from the Fells Point market. Yeah, those were good times.
Yeah, I don't know. Di Pasquale's was always my favorite. The Di Pasquale's, Italian sandwiches and subs.
Yeah, I didn't have time to eat.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Jay was standing up. Jay was busy yelling at me.
No, I did like the idea of PAs running.
But that's true. The ADs didn't have that.
On Scout.
Yeah, the ADs and
luxury most of the time. We couldn't peruse menus and, hey, let's try this. Unless we're prepping, and then that was good, because as we know, Jay, it's all about lunch while we're prepping and scouting. It's all about lunch. Where are we going to go to the restaurant with Vince Peranio? And Vince was the king of Baltimore. He knew all the best places. So in that respect, food and the lunch trips that we made with the director, that was the best, because we hit every great spot in Baltimore.
Yeah. I would say memorable, though, just to touch on, going out after, Jay was mentioning how we all hung out we were all family, and we all hung out after work. We all went to Cooper's. Patrick would take care of us at Cooper's. The Grips would go over and Duvatine, which is, hang this big black drapery up over the windows, because by the time we got off a lot of times on a Friday night, the bars were closed, and we would sometimes roll out of there at 6 a.m, and Patrick would have food and drink for us. So those were good times. As a crew, we hung out together. Just times were different back then, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, I remember when I think the first season when we used to shoot at the Wharf Rat, and I guess I can say this now, but I remember inviting all my friends over. Hey, you guys come be extras, come into the Wharf Rat. And, sometimes, nowadays they have the near beer and the non-alcoholics. These guys would just get beers from the taps, and the bartenders would be drinking the real beer. And my friends always loved that. Jimmy's not around to know that. I never mentioned that, but he'd probably be proud now but anyway, that was fun.
Yeah, fun times for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Frank say it, but Jimmy said, what was Jimmy saying about because you could say it better, Frank, about how the show is, us being part of the show.
Well, he always said, he said, you're never going to have it this good. You're never going to have it this good. And he was right. He was right. He would always say, one hand washes the other. Right. Remember who your rabbi is. So, so for Jay and me, who had to deal with all these different directors, he would say, well, the directors come and go. I'm here every day. Just don't forget who your rabbi is. And still that maintained that approach especially when you do episodic shows, because the directors do come and go. Although that's changing a lot now because a lot more block shooting and there are fewer directors for each season, and it's kind of changed a little bit. But you gotta remember who your rabbi is, and Jimmy was that rabbi.
I got another Jimmy story thing, because I ended up doing a number of other projects with Jimmy over the years. And the thing about Jimmy, the first time I met Jimmy was when I was a trainee in New York, and he was a dolly grip. And so I first knew Jimmy as a New York IA dolly grip. And there was a thing like with Teamsters and grips and electrics where production was not, were the bad guys. And they would give shit to production all the time. And, so you try and get them quiet on the set, whatever it is, like, F off and leave us alone. And they had their own way. And you had to sort of catch them. They would take off. You had to really force them to get a call sheet. It was different. It was a pain in the ass. And Jimmy was part of that. And that's what I knew Jimmy as. And, and then I remember seeing Saturday Night Fever, and Jimmy was the dolly grip on that, and him pulling, that whole opening walk on John Travolta's feet. That's Jimmy. That was an amazing move because he's going blocks and blocks. That's
still an amazing move. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jimmy was an amazing dolly grip, and the way he ended up crossing over to production manager. Did he ever tell you this story? Anybody? No. So he was working on a TV series, and I've just forgotten the name of it. But it was Bruce Paltrow and I guess Tom also were executive producers on it. And it took place around the Hudson River, on the river, and then Paltrow, I think, is the one who said, and Paltrow was actually a St. Elsewhere guy also. He said, you're smart. It was like, not to insult any grips. But the way Paltrow said it was, and this is Gwyneth's dad, by the way, and also one of our PAs one year. And he said, you're smart. I could use you, in production. You should be a production manager. And that's how Jimmy crossed over, was because they saw him as a grip, but as someone with a special talent beyond that, and the way he thought and the way that he ordered gear and doing all of that, and the way he took care of his own crew. And they pulled him on that way. And I hope none of them who are listening to this, because they'll just...
And that's how the whole 12-hour thing came on from the Paltrow group and Tom Fontana. They decided, I think it was probably on St. Elsewhere, maybe a later show, said, you know what, we're going to give our directors 12 hours and that's it. And we're going to go home. We're not going to work 15, 16 hours anymore. There's no need for this. And they made that decree. And Bruce Paltrow and Tom Fontana, and then Jimmy got it from them, and that was it. We had 12 hours. And you know what? When your hand is forced like that, you just make it happen, and we did it for the most part.
You can extend this series, this podcast, by just naming it after, Jim Finnerty, and that way you could do all the other shows he did before and after, and you'll run for years.
120 feature films as a key grip. And pushing the dolly. So the dolly is what the camera sits on and moves with track, not our butt dolly track, more conventional track in Jimmy's time, and like that shot and Saturday Night Fever. And I think his last film, right, Jay, was Platoon. I think it was
as a dolly grip.
I think.
I have a Platoon story. So I had the honor to work on Snowden as a first AD when they shot in DC, and I worked with Oliver Stone. And we had to use the bathroom at the same time. So Oliver and I are walking in front of the White House, and we had to go to Quiznos Subs, which is a mile away, but that was the only bathroom that was close enough for us to go to. So Oliver and I are walking together, and so I finally, had conversations with him, but nothing personal. So I said, I worked on a TV show with a friend of yours, that you worked with on Platoon. I said, Jim Finnerty. He goes, Jim Finnerty. He goes, man, I haven't heard that name in a long time. He says, he's come a long way. He went from a dolly grip to a production man. I think he knew exactly what he did, and he's like, he was a good man. He was still alive at the time. He goes, he's a good man, Jimmy. He had really good things to say about him. But it was just a nice conversation to have with Oliver Stone, who would remember the dolly grip from Platoon, right. All those years later, and to know what he was doing, which I thought was really cool at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A memorable guy, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't be here without him. That's for sure.
Well done, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really great. Thank you.
Miles, Frank.
Thank you.
Yes.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you all, Jay. It's great to see you. Feel great.
Great seeing you.
Great to see you, Jay.
So that was Frank, Jay, and Miles, and that was such an interesting and detailed chat. There's so many little sort of nuggets there, and as you mentioned earlier in the intro, their origin story is all quite interesting. It is fascinating finding out how people kind of started the business, and I don't know if you had any sort of thoughts on that, Susan.
Yeah, initially, and then I'll talk about the origin stories. Initially, one of the things that I really want to reiterate about this podcast is the idea that of talking in a deep way to crew people. I was thinking as we were preparing to do the introductions and stuff for this episode, that when I was younger, it still happens now, but it happened more when I was younger and when I was in the business, and I'd be watching the Academy Awards, and the director, the producer, the camera, even the cameraman, because it was always a cameraman back then, would get up to accept the award and thank everybody but the crew. And it drove me the most crazy when the camera people didn't do that. They didn't thank the crew. The sound guys, I want to say the sound mixers often mentioned their crew. It's a little better now, but I just think that really our initial thoughts of doing this podcast was to talk to people that nobody ever talks to. And you listen to the depth of their experience and the depth of the responsibilities they have and how much crew people obviously have to do with making the show, putting it together, making it work. And in this situation, mostly doing it in a way that most of us appreciated and respected and enjoyed. Because I've certainly been on shows where it's a nightmare. The show is not a nightmare. So I just sort of wanted to talk about the idea that I want to hear from the crew. So this has been really fun for me. Yeah, and the origin stories, I thought it was interesting that they mostly started as PAs, but then Jay got into the DGA training program, which was similar to the camera assistant training program that I got into and how I got into the business. And I'd have to look up and see if those things are still happening. Are there more people coming up through independent films and managing to get enough hours and get into the union, or is there still a DGA training program? Is there still a camera assistance training program? I don't know. I have to call some of my friends in LA and find out if those are still happening. But yeah, I really enjoyed their insights.
Yeah, indeed. And it was a couple of interesting things that stood out for me. So the first one was apparently the average age of an assistant director is 54 years old, and I can only assume that might be just due to the stress that they only last up until.
Yeah, I don't know if it was average age or that was as long as they last.
Yeah, sorry, average life expectancy. Sorry, life expectancy.
Lifespan,
yes.
The lifespan of a first AD, right? Early 50s.
And it's not easy. I mean, I've never, I've been an assistant director on some short films, and certainly the first ever film I worked on, quite a lot of the crew mutinied and left, and so I kept getting up and up the ranks. I think I got as far as third AD from being a production assistant. But I've watched ADs in action on some big TV shows, and there's a lot of weight on their shoulders and a lot of decisions that cost a lot of money. And there's a lot of different sort of people to please, because there's a delicate art between the kind of the story needs of the show and then the practical needs for the production, because you've only got so much time to be able to do things. And what was, I don't know if it's, well, I suppose in some ways it is unique, because a filming day is usually more than 12 hours on a lot of shows. And so what was interesting about Homicide, obviously, you had to squeeze a lot in 12 hours. And so there is obviously a lot of pressure to make the day. And the ADs are the people who ultimately, they and the director have to make sure it happens. And so I can understand why quite a few ADs usually either have moved on at the age of 54, either physically or career-wise. But,
Or just a wreck.
Yeah.
They're just wrecked by them.
Yeah, indeed. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things, same thing, a little bit of what I mentioned earlier is being on the set. I mean, I could bitch as a camera assistant, getting there before 7, start rolling at 7, wrap at 7, but then we have to take all the equipment to the truck, wrap the equipment, and then go home. And for me was, if there wasn't any traffic, maybe a half an hour, really not a bad commute, half-hour commute. So you're talking about, being at work before 7, getting home by 8 if you're lucky. But then when you listen to what Miles said as a PA and as a second, he's on the set. I'm getting up at 5:30 in the morning. He is on the set. He is at the location at 5:30 in the morning. He's there an hour and a half before the crew has to be there. And then we wrap, and he had to wait. And I remember this. He had to wait for us to be bussed in the vans back to wherever the trucks were stationed. And usually, because we were so close, often all the trucks went back to Svel's Point. And then he had to wait until every department, grip and electric, camera, wardrobe, hair and makeup, everybody wrapped their trucks. The trucks are closed up and locked. And then he's putting call sheets underneath the doors of actors. Now, that I also hadn't thought about. And driving home and stopping at people's apartments and houses and having to do that in the
Crazy.
in the days before computers and electronic, transfers and emails of all that kind of stuff, that it was all hand done, handwritten call sheets, typed call sheets, the changes and they said it was rare, if we had a call time change written in a red Sharpie on 100+ call sheets. So yeah, it was great insight for me too, to hear, what they were doing when they weren't on the set. I certainly saw what they did on the set, but I did not see what they did before. And because I rarely probably the only time I ever went to a production office on a show was when I'm signing my deal memo. Not on any daily basis am I in the production office before or after the shoot. So yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting insight. Well, just Homicide was made before this software came out called Movie Magic, which is this scheduling software that makes making the schedule a lot easier. Because in the old days, they had to do it by hand. So they would print out, is it a line by line of what the schedule would be, and then they would physically cut the paper and then put it onto something called into strips and put it on something called a strip board to then make the schedule, which I guess they would then photocopy the strip board to then make the schedule, which is insane. But yeah.
Absolutely insane. It made me think back to when I first started working after Homicide, when I became a journalist, and I started in the journalism business before computers were being used heavily. I mean, there were, there were computerized things, but that was in the day when the newspaper was pasted up on a wax board, and then photographs were made, literal, large scale negative photographs were made of each page after everything had been pasted onto this wax board. And then they went back with Sharpies. And if there were little holes or white spots, in the negative, they had to go back with the Sharpie and black everything out. So it just reminded me of that, the difference what, you know, the beginnings of the computer age coming through those processes in the newspaper business and also in production.
Yeah. One other thing that stood out for me was the support that Frank got at the beginning of his career from Jim Finessy and Rob Roy, because he came on as a key second AD, and he mentioned that when he joined Homicide, he didn't have a lot of experience of that, and Jim said that we will, you know, back you and help you learn. So by the end of that first season he worked on there, he would be fully experienced. And it's great because obviously a lot of shows, people are just expected to know what they're doing and hit the ground running. And it's good that, like, at least with Homicide, there was some element of kind of nurturing people, which is quite rare in this business.
Yeah, and also an insight there that Frank was the only local second that was in the union yet. The only assistant director, local second. And this push, which I also didn't know when I worked on the show, that one of the ways they kept everything on budget was to hire as many local people as they could. So it wasn't, let's fly in the camera crew, grip and electric from LA. It was like, get everybody from here. So, and he mentioned Shelley Ziegler, who was huge, is now and had been. She was the first on Homicide, but also went on to do huge movies and is still working. And she was not in the union yet either when Frank was brought in. And also reminded me of Josh Spring's story when he switched over from being the key grip to the gaffer. And Finnerty was like, "No, you're going to do it," which is what Finnerty said to Frank. "You're it. You know, there's no saying no in this situation." And then the whole idea they all talked about learning on the job. You know, they talked about themselves as kids. We were all kids learning on the job, which is interesting. And then even for me, and, you know, I had quite a bit of experience coming from LA, but on completely different kinds of films. You know, I had never worked on a film that was shot like this. So even for me, it was a learning curve because I had never worked on a set with a roving 16 millimeter camera. Or even in my whole time in LA, I never worked with a 60 millimeter camera. I hadn't worked with 60 millimeter cameras since college.
Yeah.
Those are great cameras, though, gotta say.
They are, yeah. The Arton and the equivalent of that would be the Arri SR3 or 2. Lovely cameras, yeah. A couple other notes that made me chuckle was the fact that apparently Jay mentioned a lot of people have conflicting memories about what actually happened on the show, and the other funny thing was how Seinfeld influenced rap times on the show. I found that quite amusing.
Those things are like I'd never heard of before. I don't remember that. I even remembered I thought we were on Thursday nights, but we were on Friday night. So I don't know why I thought we were on Thursday night, which is funny.
Yeah.
After Homicide, Frank worked on, you know, the next David Simon book, The Corner, and then The Wire, and then went to New Orleans and worked on Treme. He worked on House of Cards. Like, you know, Lorenzo was the mixer, sound mixer on House of Cards. He worked on Walking Dead. And now, I guess still, right before he spoke to us, was still working on Lioness.
Yeah, which is the Paramount Plus show. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, Jay as well. I mean, like, you know, Jay's been on lots of things. He's not only been an assistant director, but he's also sort of directed a lot of things as well. He was director of Dawson's Creek. He's been on Chicago Hope, The Agency, which was one I liked, a CIA-based show. And, he's been an assistant director on a show called Next. He's been on Tom Clancy's The Pledge.
And Law and Order.
Loads of things. Law and
October
Order,
Road.
yeah.
And Brockmire. I just recently saw the first episode of Brockmire. It's on a streaming thing I don't get, but it was so good. Really funny.
And he was on The Crow as well, which is the infamous film. Do you remember the one with Brandon Lee?
Oh gosh, that was where
Crow.
Brandon Lee got
the original.
Shot.
Yeah, he was on that. And then, you know, Miles has worked on loads of things. Miles has been on Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, Snowden, Veep, The East, which is a great spy film. And then America's Most Wanted, which is obviously the TV show about real crimes.
Yeah, I meant to ask him. I had it in my notes. I meant to ask him if he saw similarities. And because obviously America's Most Wanted was a crime show, and a reality show. It was very run and gun. And, you know I heard people talking about their ridiculous hours and how difficult I think logistically it was working on the show. But I meant to ask him if he saw any parallels between the way we shot Homicide, which was obviously a dramatic series, in relation to America's Most Wanted in a reality cop show. But I didn't. I forgot to ask.
Oh, well, I'll have to do a follow-up.
Yeah, and I think that the whole idea of people getting a better sense of the enormous responsibility and logistics that they had to deal with. Like, I only had to deal with the camera crew. I mean, I worked with everybody else, but they had to be in every department and understanding what they needed, what they had to have. I mean, that really is an amazing amount of responsibility and logistics that the assistant directors deal with, and which helps make the show run smoothly and be successful. Obviously, they helped keep it on schedule, which helped it be successful enough for NBC to keep picking it up for 7 seasons.
Yeah, because they'd gone over schedule and over budget. That the show would have been cancelled a long time ago. So no, they're the as I said earlier, the glue that holds it all together, and in many ways very underappreciated a lot of the times. But I think the ADs are a vital part of the show. So I'm glad we managed to chat with them and get insight from such sort of established assistant directors. Really, they've done amazing careers they've had since Homicide, and obviously working on Homicide itself, which is a fantastic show. So yeah.
And fun. It was so much fun catching up with them and talking to them, and funny stories. Yes. And just really, it was really enjoyable talking to the three of them. It was great.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that interview, and thank you very much for listening, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, take care.
Bye.